Perfect. Thanks, Zach. All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second of our 2022 Sustainability Seminar Series. Tonight, we will be talking about sustainable food and food access. So the food that we get and how we get it. So just before we get into that topic, I did want to remind everyone that this is a part of our 2022 Sustainability Series. So we have 5 events in this series this year. The first one was last month, where we talked about everyday electrification. And if you happen to miss that one and want to check it out, it is available on our YouTube channel, which you can access by going to this website over on the right. And then down at the bottom of the page, there should be a link to our YouTube channel. You can also go to that events page that's on the right-hand side of the screen to register for the other 3 events that are still upcoming. So in March, we'll be talking about soil and the circular economy of soil. So composting and such like that. In April, we'll be talking about air quality monitoring. And then in May, we'll be talking about A2ZERO and me. So how folks can get involved with A2ZERO. So Zach is actually in charge of running the Circular Economy of Soil one next month, my colleague Zach. So I will pass it over to him really quickly to give you a little preview of what that event will be.
Hi, everyone. Next month we will be taking a look at the circular economy of soil and how compost becomes soil, which feeds flora, which eventually becomes compost, and so on. We'll be exploring the environmental impacts that affect this cycle, and we're putting together a panel of folks who can speak about soils and things that live in them. So we're excited to have you all join us next month. That is the last Wednesday of March.
Awesome. Thank you, Zach. So hopefully we will all see you again then. But for now, let's move on to tonight's topic. So just to give you an overview of what we're going to be talking about tonight, we'll hear from Gerhart and Keesa Johnson from the Washtenaw County Food Policy Council. They'll be talking about local food and access and food equity. We'll then have a short break in between the talks. And then after that break, when we come back, we'll hear from Scott Nelson from the USGS on the environmental benefits of plant-forward diets. And then the final speaker this evening will be Dr. Olivier Jolliet. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, who will talk about health and environmental impacts of our dietary choices. And then after all of the speakers have gone, we'll have a Q&A session. Please feel free, you should see a Q&A function on your Zoom. Please feel free to go ahead and put questions in there as you think of them. You don't have to hold them in your head the whole time, but we will be getting to those questions at the end of the evening. So without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen and introduce our first 2 speakers for the evening, and then pull up their presentation. As I mentioned, we'll be hearing from Gerhart. So Jay spent 6 years as the local foods coordinator for Washtenaw County. During that time, she focused on helping farmers and food makers make more transactions in local markets. Jay currently chairs the Washtenaw County Food Policy Council and is the manager of farm programs at the farm at St. Joe's in Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti. And then we'll also be hearing from Jay's colleague, Keesa Johnson. Keesa is an equity and access designer, a scholar activist, and design educator who actively redesigns a just and equitable food future within the state of Michigan. Keesa is the first racial equity chair for the Washtenaw County Food Policy Council and is the coalition leader of the Washtenaw County Black Farmers Fund. Due to the urgent need to remove unequal barriers in local and state policy, she is co-leading the Michigan Local Food Policy Network as a food policy fellow at the MSU Center for Regional Food Systems. So with that, let me pull up their presentation and then I will pass it off to Jay.
Thank you, Sean.
No problem.
All right. Hi, everyone. Good evening. So I'm going to start. I'm going to talk about some local food and sustainability, how that intersects, how you can find it, what the Washtenaw Food Policy Council is doing. And Keesa is going to tackle food equity. But it's important to note that these things don't exist in silos. These are interconnected topics, but we're just breaking them up in our presentation today. You can go to the next slide. Great. So I want to talk about this intersection of local and sustainable, because local isn't always sustainable and sustainable isn't always local. When we think about local, we really think about like how close is that food to us. That's the whole definition of local, is like proximal. And we can think about this in like an economic development sense. We can think of it in a health sense, or we can think of it in an environmental sense. There's where the intersection is going to come in. And then when we think about sustainable, we can think about, is the environment sustainable, sustainability within people, sustainability economically. And of course, we're going to think about food. So we're going to thinking about this intersection of local and sustainable tonight, and where those cross over, where those meet in our Venn diagram, is thinking about the transportation, like what kind of pollution, carbon is emitted from our transportation systems, and how that impacts our food choices, and also food production. I'm not going to talk about transportation tonight because actually that has a very little impact. The research is showing that the way that food is produced has a greater impact on our environment, and on climate change than transportation. I'm sure that can be argued, but we're just going to talk about food production and local food tonight. Go to the next slide. So soil matters. After the oceans, soil is the second largest carbon sink on our planet. I'm really excited that you guys are going to dive into soil next month. I hope I can join, because soil is very, very important for everything. Globally, cropland can store 1.85 gigatons of carbon every year. And the data is also showing that it will take 20 to 40 years to like max out the soil's ability to sequester carbon. So it's a really important tool that we need to think about when we're thinking about climate change. So carbon sequestration happens in the roots. And you'll see here on this picture, you have a picture of like a perennial grasses. So grasslands, what the Great Plains used to be. And then on the other side of this man, you see the root systems in annual agriculture. So ground that is tilled or planted every year. And you see the root systems are vastly different. And then if you look at lawns, they're even worse if the root system is like that big. So when we think about how do we convert more of our land to be able to sequester carbon, we have to think about planting more of these perennial grasses and utilizing their deep root structures to sequester carbon. I'm going to go to the next slide. Here's just another example. You got perennial wheat on the left, and you have native wheat, native grass on the right. So this stuff on soil is not new. This is a picture of George Washington Carver, which, people ask you that question of like, if you could go to dinner with one person, dead or alive, who would it be? I think he's my man. I have so many questions that I want to ask him. So at the time that he was doing his research, the US was engaged in two big production systems. One was cotton in the South, and the other was wheat in the Great Plains. And both were stripping the soil of any of its nutritive properties. And so farms would be moving land as they used up land, they would move to the next. And at the time, the US just had like seemingly endless amounts of land. he knew that wasn't the case. And also a lot of his research was for the peasant farmer and for the Black farmer who'd just recently been emancipated. And so his research was showing small farmers how to preserve their soil, do things like take muck, have pigs, things like that, so that they could grow nutritious food for their families and not deplete their soil. He has a great quote that says, "The farmer whose soil produces less every year is unkind to it in some way. He is robbing it of some substance it must have, and he becomes therefore a soil robber and not a farmer." Okay, you can go to the next slide. This is Rodale. Rodale also had the same ideas about soil. He created the Rodale Institute, which is one of our leading research institutes on organic and other sustainable farming practices. Go to the next slide. So everyone hates the cow when we talk about climate change, and I get it. You know, we think about, we need to reduce our meat consumption. We need to, you know, cows give off methane. And by and large, for the majority of the way that we produce cows, yes. Do we need to reduce our meat consumption? Absolutely. But I think the cow can also be our tool. So when cows are moving around, when they're raised in a way of high intense rotational grazing on pasture, their movement, so their hooves stomping on the ground, their poop, and then moving from place to place allows these grasses to grow more and more vibrant, deeper root systems, sequestering more and more carbon. They are a tool for sequestering carbon, and their secondary resource is providing meat for us. So if we think of cows in that way, and we can change our systems so that we're not producing cows in ways of strip mining the soil by producing soy and corn, trucking that to feedlots, feeding the cows, dealing with their poop, we can both keep meat in the diet, keep the world of animal agriculture alive, and be in a better relationship with both this as a food source and sequestering carbon at the same time. Next slide. So that's animal agriculture, but the other thing we need to think about with helping our soil is tillage. So when we till the soil, we're like turning it up. That is ruining the soil aggregates. The soil aggregates are the part that is sequestering carbon. So if we're ruining these soil aggregates, we're just like letting off carbon, and we're also increasing desertification of that soil, which then makes the soil less capable of sequestering carbon. So it's this like compounding effect. No-till, both there's two types of no-till organic and no-till conventional. No-till organic, you don't spray anything the way you would in a no-till conventional system. And the soil is never getting churned. It is never like the soil structure is preserved. We're not ruining those aggregates. And you're preserving both nutrients, so you're creating more nutrient dense foods, and you're preserving your soil for then many years to come. We are seeing more and more of these types of farmers here locally, which is really exciting. A lot of the farms that you'll see at Argus and Agricole and the farmers market are doing this type of production, both the high intense rotational grazing and the no-till organic produce production. Next slide. So this is great, Jay, you say. Where can I get this wonderful food? So we have to realize that we are so lucky down here in Washtenaw County. We have so many markets that you can access food from from these types of farmers who are really conscious about their impacts on the soil, about their wanting to preserve both the natural resources that they might be stewarding, or just preserving their farm so they can grow better food year in and year out. This is a picture of Argus. In addition, Agricole in Chelsea and Acorn in Manchester are all these local farm stop type grocery stores where you can buy food 7 days a week, produced from your local farmers. And then we have 13 farmers markets in Washtenaw County that happen on every day except Monday. I think it's the only day that there's not a farmers market in Washtenaw County. So another great place to go talk with local farmers, ask them questions. Organic is great, but learning about all the stuff that you guys are learning about in this A2ZERO series and then applying it by asking some hard questions is also great. Next slide. So what is the Washtenaw Food Policy Council doing about all of this? So the Food Policy Council, we are guided by what we call our policy agenda items. These are items that we've agreed on with the Board of Commissioners that we are going to follow these. We are going to be guided by these as we make policy recommendations or engage in committees, and pretty much do the work of building a stronger local food system here. So of these items, the ones that intersect with the topic that we're talking about tonight are that we aim to advocate for a food system that promotes equity, accessibility, nutrition, and sustainability. I talked about how we get more nutrient dense foods from some of these practices, and it also is a sustainability measure. We're going to advocate for ordinances that allow small scale food production. So we know, like George Washington Carver showed us, that family farms can really be an impact in this system and can be producing a lot of great food, both for their families and their communities. So promoting more of that. Promoting policies and practices leading to the purchase of products produced locally and using sustainable methods. So we've done things like provided guidance and provided policies to Washtenaw County purchasing, Ann Arbor purchasing, the schools, to help them both with the tools, the education, and sometimes policy measures to really promote more local and sustainable purchasing. And then of course, preserving pollinator habitat, because one, we absolutely need pollinators, but two, a lot of that pollinator habitat has those deep roots. Those are native plants that are conditioned to our environment. And so the more that we support those habitats, the more carbon sequestration we're going to get. And yeah, so that's a bit about local food and the Food Policy Council and how we're working to build a more sustainable world here. I'll hand it off to Keesa.
All right. Am I here? Oh yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
All right, everyone. My name is Keesa V. Johnson, and I am the Racial Equity Chair and Liaison for the Washtenaw Food Policy Council. It's great to meet you. And here I'll be talking about equity and access in food systems, right? Next slide. I'd like to start off with some grounding to understand that you can't divorce how you treat the earth from the people who tend it. And as people, we can't divorce ourselves from the land, and that's my grounding statement, and I'll be making references along the way. Next slide. Again, I'd like to start off with some acknowledgements, and Jay did a great job understanding about who George Washington Carver is. When you think about regenerative farming, sustainability, organic practices that focus on soil biodiversity, we like to give some ashe and some thanks to George Washington Carver. Next. I also give acknowledgements to Booker T. Whatley, who was his protege, which created the clientele membership clubs, which we know today as community supported agriculture. He was the founding father in that, on how farmers would go out and create clientele. Next slide. I also like to give some thanks and acknowledgements when it comes to what we call land trust from the Sherrods, Shirley and Charles Sherrod. Shirley Sherrod, she used to work for the USDA, and I think she is coming back. But there was tremendous uproar due to 5,700 acres of land that they had in Georgia, and they created a land trust to try to keep that land, but it was taken away from the USDA. But they now have more acreage now than before. And so she's a catalyst, and her husband as well, when it comes to the land trust movement. Next slide. When we talk about cooperatives, I don't want you to think that it just mainly comes from Blacks. It is a strategy that is used across the globe. Many other different societies outside of the United States have used cooperatives for centuries, but as Black people and African Americans, cooperatives are at the center of what we do and who we are. And it's due to the fact of Fannie Lou Hamer. She's the queen of what we call food justice. A lot of people know her as being a delegate, a senator. She provided vegetables, home ownership, shared land, shared student scholarship. She helped with cotton harvest strikes, shared equipment with many different farmers. She did it all. And with her team, she made it work when it came to cooperative economics, mutual aid, solidarity. Next slide. I also like to give some understanding about the first colonial greenhouse that was founded. It was some archaeological diggings that just happened from the 18th century that reveals, and Frederick Douglass, that's why I think it was a lot of talk about it. That was his home when he stayed on in the plantation. And it reveals how African Americans, those who were enslaved, played a sophisticated and technical role in the construction of the first greenhouse and the operations. And there was like a lot of tangible evidence involved that showed our spiritual connection to the land. And that's because that when you look at the laws of the universe and how the land is governed, we as a people look at reciprocity as a high ideal and value and practice. In African cosmology, we believe that there's no separation between the sacred of every day, so there's deep reverence. Next slide. Here's some other agrarian technologies throughout agriculture that were brought here to the US. You could think about the donkey, that's from West Africa. If you're thinking about herding and farming rotation, rice cultivation, cotton, eggplant, black rice, and kale. It can go on forever. Even when it comes to interlocking, there's many more. I wanted to share this picture because there's this great myth that we speak about a lot in my culture, where we as descendants have, like our grandmothers and our foremothers, braided seeds in our hair. So if you look at that picture, this picture is showing that we are descendants of futurists, carrying on the legacy of our ancestral grandmothers who braided seeds in their hair before boarding the transatlantic slave ships, believing against odds in the future of sovereignty on this land. So we brought a lot of knowledge. We were very highly evolved people. We were architects, we were scientists, we were social scientists. And so I wanted to share that and give an acknowledgement. Next slide. One thing I also want you to think about on how we approach spaces when it comes from an African and indigenous understanding is that we share this secular sharing and deep reverence of the land. So if we're using something from the land, such as a bark that grows on the tree, we boil it, we strain the bark, and then we give it back to the space in the land where we plant it back. And so we're using like this circular and this secular knowledge and interlocking cycles that we learned from Africa. Next slide. Also, when you look at Native American technologies, that add value and doesn't alienate things. We can look at the 3 sisters. Sometimes it's called the 4 sisters. I really think it's the 9 sisters. And this is because that the different plants depend on one another, on how they grow and how they provide nutrients to the spaces. And I want us to kind of remember that while we're thinking about how we grow and solve problems together, because we look at the ecosystem and the natural circulation of Africans and Native Americans, these things have been ingrained in us for centuries. Next slide. So when you look at traditional agricultural technology, it's really regenerative, and it's regenerative because it doesn't alienate value, like labor, ecology, or social cultural value, right? It's circular, Again, next slide. So I mention these things because it helps uplifts our integrity and sense of connection to one another when we know the origins of these technologies. It puts us in a much different space of appreciation. I also I'm an equity and access designer. And so when I look at the words equity and access, I always have a challenging frame about that because a lot of times it does not highlight people's agency, resilience, and resistance. It doesn't show how we do that through activism, subversion, which is DE&I, diversity, equity, inclusion, and hacking. And it doesn't invite participation, and it doesn't allow people to tell their own stories. So let's see what we've been doing at the Washtenaw Food Policy Council. Please go ahead if you want to read something more further. We have our annual report on the slide. Now, a lot of who I am comes a lot from food and farming. There, globally, many Black and farm farmers nationwide struggle to keep their farms afloat, and they faced a lot of disparities, and they're still facing disparities today. Next slide. So looking at data globally, a lot of times when we're looking at climate, agriculture is extremely important. Agriculture is the most impactful human activity on the planet. Although currently, a lot of times when we look at big ag, it's pretty negative. But again, how Jay was sharing that we have many, many local farmers. That's why it's really important to buy local, that use different techniques that allow for the carbon that's in the sky to come down into the soil. So it's really important that happens. And I know everybody here probably has more recent data when it comes to the global emissions and that's going on globally. Next slide. For us as a team, we looked at a lot of inequity in Washtenaw County, where we were looking at the difference between white producers and Black producers when it comes to farming and the acreage of space and land. Next slide. We were also looking at what was going on with food insecurity, and you can look at this data now, and it shows a lot of food insecurities. There's a significant disproportionate. There's a significant difference between a Black income, white income, Hispanic families, female households. There's a lot of disparities that we see. Next slide. So what we did was, as a team, we decided that we were going to have some action priorities. We filled the racial equity liaison position with me. We participated in an equity and action grant project that was sponsored by the Michigan Local Food Network, Food Policy Council Network, and we took a group training, not only the policy members, but also several county commissioners, and we also reached out to people who worked in community organizations or just community members, and we did a training to kind of ground ourselves called Uprooting Racism in the Food System. And we did a collaboration with the Washtenaw County Black Farmers Fund, and we adopted a racial equity statement. Next slide. So here is our our equity statement, and you guys can read it fully, but we do believe food is a basic human right. And it's a core part of who we are. And we believe that the laws and rules that shape our food system are rooted in white supremacy, and we have to evolve. And so we work towards a more equitable food space. And so we prioritize our policies and our projects that promote equity for groups that have been systematically excluded. And if you want to learn more about white narratives and whiteness within the food system, there's a link to some data from the Duke Food Policy. The food policy, not their council, but their organization that studies food policy. Next slide. As a team, as a group, this was our community action. We got together and did some equity in action areas, a part of our community outreach. We wanted to do something very circular. And as you can see, we wanted to most definitely stand out and understand when we're working on equity projects. We're going to look at resources, we're going to look at power dynamics, and we're going to look at bringing back dignity to individuals, because in this system, it is a very dehumanizing system. And so we're looking at land, relationship building, and communication. And I'll show you some action areas on how we approached it. Next slide. Again, we start partnering with the Black Farmers Fund. I am the coalition leader. We wanted to kind of allocate land and space and resources to support Black farmers in Washtenaw County. And you can learn more about that story and that journey at the website. Next slide. We wanted to look at power dynamics and really work on relationship building. If we're trying to create an ecosystem to make it safe for Black and brown farmers to exist within the Washtenaw food shed. We built positive relationships with BIPOC-led organizations and community. We identified Black farmers and we collected Black farmer stories. We identified 6 Black farmers and we paid them for their service, for their time to be able to collect the interviews and the stories that they shared with us. Next slide. Dignity and communication. We're working to identify and use equity-based language, share information on accessibility, and uplift the voices of Black farmers in our local food system. And so as a council, we're creating an equity-based language document for our council. We're making equity a key goal for our outreach activities and social media, as well as our policy action teams, which is called PATS. And we're working this year with the African American Cultural and Historical Museum of Washtenaw County to share and log our Black farmer stories. Next slide. So our actions moving forward. Right now, currently, we are doing community research teams with the county commissioners. We're going to do some continued workshops and training that we have to decide upon. Building relationships with elected officials. There was an equity and policy making workshop session that many of us attended. And again, our community research teams with the county commissioners, which is led by our food access PAT, which is led by Aaron Freeman of not the Fair Food, it's not the Fair Food Network. Oh my gosh, I'm getting confused. Sorry, with the coalition. It's not the Fair, but Aaron Freeman is leading it. And so with our organization structure, we're going to continue doing a racial equity scan within ourselves, because we like to mirror like what we go out and do and what we preach. We like to mirror it amongst ourselves. We also added a disability justice liaison. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the equity action PAT next to wrap it up. So it's very important, like a lot of the work that is done in these outside groups called policy actions teams. And we have various ones, and the PATs are open to the public, and we're always looking for people to join. And so if you're interested in joining any of our PATs, which is planning and zoning, food access, nutrition, our farmers PAT, we're also about to get started again on getting our food waste and packaging PAT together. And then we have our equity in action PAT, which our focus really is going to be about how we work on projects and more about design implementation of a lot of things that we plan on working with. And next slide. And thank you guys so much for listening and engaging with us.
Great, thank you both so much. Really appreciate the explanation of local food and food equity in our system. And I know most folks aren't on camera, but I hope everyone is joining me in a virtual round of applause. So we're going to pause here for around 5 minutes or so everyone can take a stretch, go grab a hopefully healthy and locally sourced snack or beverage. Do whatever you need to do, and we will be reconvening at 6:45 for our next presentation. All right, we'll go ahead and get started again in just a few seconds. Give everyone time to get settled back in their seats. And then we'll start off with our next presentation. All right, just make sure, Scott, are you back with us?
I'm here.
Great. All right, I will go ahead and introduce our next speaker then, which is Scott Nelson. Scott was educated at Eastern Michigan University in aquatic biology and computer science, and is employed for 37 years at the U.S. Geological Survey's Great Lakes Science Center here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, as the information technology lead. He is a past president of the Rotary Club of Ann Arbor North, where he's a member of 30 years. Scott has belonged to the Ann Arbor Seventh-day Adventist Church since 1990, which is a community of practice for plant-rich diets. Scott also belongs to the steering committee of Washtenaw Optimal Wellness, another community of practice promoting the Blue Zones lifestyle here in our county. So with that, I will pass it off to Scott to talk about some environmental impacts of benefits of plant-rich diets.
Okay, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear.
And can you see my screen?
That too, yep.
Okay, great. All right. Yeah, I really enjoyed the preceding presentations by Jay and Keesa. I'm actually doing a district grant project through my Rotary Club of Ann Arbor North and the District 6380 with T.C. Collins, who Keesa had pictured on one of her slides. He's a local African-American agricultural expert, and we're doing a collaborative agricultural project with Vestergaard Farms. TC is with Willow Run Acres. Vestergaard is down on Ann Arbor Saline Road, and on right around Earth Day, we're going to be putting in a farm bot, which is a robotic food growing system. So it's kind of cool. So I am grateful to have the opportunity to share with you why plant-rich diets are such a powerful yet largely untapped solution to addressing climate change and protecting the environment. And the beauty of plant-rich diet solution is that we can start today. This is a planetary solution that is entirely in our hands as consumers. It doesn't require political will, new technology, trillions of dollars of investment, intense negotiations, or decades of implementation. All it takes is a conscious decision by those of us who don't face food insecurity. So especially those of us living in wealthier cities like Ann Arbor to eat more plants and fewer animals starting today. That's it. And more great news is that plant-rich diets will improve our health and save money. Research has demonstrated that plant-rich dietary patterns can prevent and sometimes even reverse chronic diseases and are generally less expensive than meat-heavy diets. Now, as you listen to our presentation today and you learn about how the world's high consumption of meat, dairy, eggs, and fish is harming our planet, please keep in mind that all we have to do to halt and reverse the devastation is to eat fewer of these foods. On the title slide there, you'll see the co-authors, Andrea Wotan and Anne-Marie Muhumdar. And Andrea is here in Ann Arbor and may have been one of the primary instigators of getting plant-rich into the A2ZERO plan, along with WOW members, Washtenaw Optimal Wellness. Anne-Marie is over in Singapore. And you'll see that we are in a global Rotary environmental sustainability Rotary Action Group plant-rich diet task force. So that's where this presentation generates for. So I'm going to be talking about global statistics that certainly have local relevance. I'm going to go to the next slide. So fasten your seatbelts because we've got an action-packed agenda. We're going to address how plant-rich diets can address climate change, protect the terrestrial environment, revitalize our oceans, share sustainable eating strategies, positive impacts on human health. And then one of my closing slides, I'll invite you to a recorded session of a 15-day global plant-rich diet challenge that we did last year in October. And we have it up on a YouTube channel with 15 video presentations recorded from around the world, and 15 emails, daily emails, and a starter kit. And we'll talk about some calls to action. I'd like to define what we mean by a plant-rich diet. It's any dietary pattern that consists mostly of plant foods, including vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, nuts and seeds, but optionally can also include a small amount of meat, dairy, eggs, and fish. The plate depicted here was published by the Eat Lancet Commission in 2019. This commission brought together 37 scientists from 16 countries to determine the dietary pattern that would be optimal for both human health and environmental sustainability. And this plate reflects the dietary pattern that accomplishes both of these goals simultaneously. And while some people might think that when you adopt a plant-rich diet, you'll eat nothing but boring salads for the rest of your life, nothing could be further from the truth. Look at all these delicious and colorful dishes. Plant-rich eating offers an endless variety of flavors, ingredients, herbs, and spices from around the world, and accommodates every cultural taste and preference. And how cool it is to know that you can protect the planet simply by eating delicious food. So let's talk about climate change. Due to the severity of the climate crisis, I'll be exploring the relationship between animal agriculture and climate change. On August the 9th of last year, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, told us that unless there are immediate, rapid, and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, achieving our climate goals will be beyond reach. While a temperature rise of 1.5 degrees Celsius sometime within the next 2 decades is essentially locked in, we do have a short window to avoid locking in climate catastrophe. And we really need to take advantage of this window, because what we're hearing is that planetary warming above 1.5 degrees Celsius will mean much more vicious floods, heat waves, worsening droughts, greater sea level rise, etc. And what we don't often talk about, but which is that changes in rainfall and hotter temperatures will make it more difficult to grow food, putting a third of global food production at risk. The IPCC made it clear that now is the time to pull out all the stops and reduce all of the greenhouse gas emissions every single place we can, and that includes the global food system. Next, here's why. 2 recently published studies, one of which was spearheaded by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, found that the global food system is responsible for about 34% or 18 gigatons of human caused greenhouse gas emissions. This is more than double the total emissions for the United States. 57% of these emissions come from the production of animal-based foods, including livestock feed. 29% comes from production of plant-based foods, and 14% comes from other utilizations. Now that's one calculation. It'd be interesting to look at what Jay was talking about there and see if with no-till farming, you can really create a carbon sink out of plant-based food production rather than having it being a net emitter, even at a lower percentage than the animal production. So this is the food that is most responsible for most emissions is beef, accounting for 25% of total food system emissions. This is an incredible opportunity because plant-rich diets offer such a simple and fast way to reduce emissions from animal agriculture. Reducing or eliminating beef alone will have a huge impact. To give you a sense for the magnitude of animal agriculture's emissions, here are a few data points. The top 5 meat and dairy companies combined emit more greenhouse gases than ExxonMobil, Shell, or BP. In fact, if just cows were their own nation, they would be the world's third largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions, behind China and the US. This chart helps us understand why. It shows greenhouse gas emissions for every 100 grams of protein produced of each of these foods. Producing beef emits about 20 times more greenhouse gases than producing comparable plant-based proteins like beans, other pulses, and peas, which you see at the bottom. Producing other products from cows, including dairy herd beef, cheese, and milk, also results in far more greenhouse gases than plant-based proteins. Pork and chicken are not off the hook, since producing them emits about 3 times more greenhouse gas emissions than producing legumes. To put this in context, there we go. The Natural Resources Defense Council tells us that if every American were to cut out just a quarter pound of beef per week, the greenhouse gas reduction would be like taking 10 million cars off the road for 1 year. On a global scale, if 2 billion of us high consumers of meat and dairy cut our consumption by just 40%, we would avoid 68 gigatons of future greenhouse gas emissions, which is equivalent to almost 3 times the total global emissions in the year 2019. So perhaps you're starting to see how impactful plant-rich diets can be. You might be wondering where all of these emissions are coming from, so let's take a look. The livestock industry is a leading emitter of all 3 of the top greenhouse gases: methane, nitrous oxide, and carbon dioxide. Methane comes directly from livestock animals. It's emitted in the burps of ruminants, especially cows, but also sheep, goats, and buffalo, and from manure lagoons on industrialized dairies, pig farms, and cattle feedlots. The nitrous oxide comes primarily from growing feed crops. It's emitted from the breakdown of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer used on feed crops and from the decomposition of manure spread on feed crops or left on pastures. Carbon dioxide is released when natural ecosystems like forests and grasslands are converted to pasture for grazing livestock, or to crops like soybean or corn for livestock feed. The carbon that was in the trees, vegetation, and soils gets released into the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide also comes from the use of fossil fuels to make fertilizers and pesticides for feed crops, and from transporting and processing livestock feed. So let's take a look at each of these gases to really appreciate why a global shift to plant-rich diets can be a game changer for our planet. Starting with methane. The IPCC just told us that fast and drastic cuts to methane are imperative to avoid climate catastrophe. The reason that methane reductions are so important is that methane only lasts about a decade in our atmosphere compared to CO2, which can last hundreds of thousands of years. But if you look at its impact over a short lifespan, methane traps about 85 times more heat than CO2. This is called methane's GWP20, or global warming potential over 20 years. This is bad news because methane is largely responsible for the fast pace of planetary warming. In fact, about 30% of global warming to date is due to methane emissions. Therefore, methane offers a huge opportunity, because if we reduce it now, the atmosphere will respond quickly within a decade or so, and the planetary warming will slow down. A lead reviewer for the IPCC report stated that cutting methane is the single biggest and fastest strategy for slowing down warming. So I've got really good news for you. This chart shows that 32% of the world's methane comes from livestock. It's the world's second leading source of methane after the fossil fuel industry, which emits 35%. Methane emissions from the two industries are about equal. Methane comes directly from livestock animals. If we eat fewer animals starting today, the livestock industry will start to downsize. When the animals are gone, the methane is gone. It's that simple. We need to start eliminating methane now. And diet change is an effective way to do exactly that. Cutting methane from both the fossil fuel industry and the animal agriculture is imperative. What about nitrous oxide? Nitrous oxide is considered a climate super pollutant. It traps 298 times more heat in our atmosphere than does CO2. It's also now the world's leading ozone depleting emission. It's emitted in smaller quantities than CO2, but packs a walloping punch. Well, there again, there's good news. 53% of nitrous oxide emissions come from animal agriculture. And remember that nitrous oxide results from nitrogen fertilizer and manure used on feed crops. If demand for animal products drops, leading to reductions in the number of livestock animals, we won't need to grow as much livestock feed, and nitrous oxide emissions will drop. Not only is this great news for the climate, it's also great news for our water resources, since we'll have less nitrogen fertilizer and manure and fewer pesticides and herbicides washing off feed crops into our waterways. We'll touch on this point later. Finally, let's look at carbon dioxide. And let's see what happened here. I'm getting on the right slide. There we go. Plant-rich diets offer a huge opportunity to cut carbon emissions and facilitate carbon sequestration. Raising animals for food requires an enormous amount of land. In fact, animal agriculture is the largest user of land on the planet, using 83% of the entire world's farmland to graze livestock and grow livestock feed. 34% of global crops production goes to feeding livestock. So here's a great infographic from the Plantrition Project. Feeding one person, the standard American diet, which is heavy in meat and dairy, requires about 2 football fields worth of land. However, those same 2 football fields can feed 14 people on a mostly plant-based diet. If all 7.8 billion of us on the face of the earth were consuming the standard American diet, we would need at least 2 planet Earths to feed us all. This enormous need for land means that the global livestock industry is the #1 driver of tropical deforestation. And when forests or other natural habitats are burned, cleared, or tilled to create pasture or grow livestock feed, the trees, vegetation, and soils will release their vast stores of carbon into the atmosphere, increasing CO2 levels. Not only that, but the ability of the newly cleared land to sequester carbon is severely compromised, which means that more and more CO2 remains in our atmosphere as we clear more land. According to a study published in 2020, if the world continues consuming meat as usual, we will pump another 86 gigatons of CO2 into our atmosphere by 2050 from land use change alone. However, if the world were to cut meat consumption by 70%, the pasture and feed crop land that we could liberate back to nature for restoration of native forests and grasslands could sequester 332 gigatons of CO2 by the year 2050. That's close to the remaining carbon budget of 360 gigatons. That gives us a 66% chance of limiting warming to 1.3 degrees Celsius. This sequestration potential would provide us with desperately needed time and wiggle room to roll out green energy without exceeding 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. Importantly, the researchers found that even if we liberated all of livestock's land back to nature today, we could still produce more than enough food for every human living on Earth using the remaining cropland. Ceasing fossil fuel use is fundamental to limit global warming, but CO2, nitrous oxide, methane removal by terrestrial vegetation following plant-rich dietary shifts could contribute more to international greenhouse gas reduction targets. And just imagine the habitat and ecosystems we could restore. Plant-rich diets offer us an almost dreamlike opportunity to take our degraded planet into our arms and bring it back to life. So I hope I've conveyed how plant-rich diets can be a game changer for our climate. Project Drawdown, an SRAG partner and research organization that has evaluated the 76 available solutions for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, ranks plant-rich diets as the fourth most powerful solution out of all 76. Plant-rich diets, together with reducing food waste, mentioned by Keesa, are the two most powerful demand-side solutions for taking a big bite out of climate change. You can see that reducing food waste even ranks above plant-rich diets in the 76 solutions by Project Drawdown. So I'd like to spend just a little bit of time sharing how plant-rich diets offer a plethora of co-benefits, starting with water. Currently, fertilizer, pesticide, and manure runoff from feed crops, together with pollutants from industrialized animal feeding operations and slaughterhouses, are a leading cause of water pollution around the world, causing toxic algae blooms, fish kills, ocean dead zones, and contaminated drinking water. If we reduce our consumption of animal-derived foods, much of this pollution goes away. In 2014, the water system in Toledo was shut down because of harmful algal blooms in Lake Erie. And those algal blooms are entirely due to the agricultural system surrounding Lake Erie. Plant-rich diets would also go a long way to conserving the precious water the world has left. 75% of fresh water globally is used for crops and livestock. Beef alone accounts for 1/3 of the global water footprint of farm animal production. In the US, cattle feed is our largest user of water, consuming 23% of all water nationally, 32% in drought-stricken Western US, and 55% in the equally drought-stricken Colorado River Basin. Most of the water used by the livestock industry is for irrigating livestock feed. If people in the US and globally were to reduce consumption of all livestock products, the water currently used to grow animal feed would be conserved or used for more urgent purposes. I've alluded to the fact that animal agriculture is the #1 cause of tropical deforestation and destruction of other habitats around the world, and especially in South America. This is taking a very heavy toll on wildlife. If we switch to eating more plants and fewer animals, we will curtail deforestation and give these guys a good chance to recover. A global shift in consumer demand is the first and most fundamental step to realizing all of these wonderful planet restoring opportunities just described. This change will be accelerated if we start providing support to farmers to switch from animal agriculture to growing diversified plants like oats, hemp, fava beans, vegetables, etc., and setting aside land for carbon sequestration, biodiversity protection, water restoration, etc. This is an area that needs attention and financial support right now. At the bottom of the slide are several pioneering organizations, including 3 nonprofits and 2 plant-based food companies, which are already helping farmers to make the switch, including Agriculture Fairness Alliance, the Rancher Advocacy program, the Transformation Project, Miyoko's Creamery, and Helsa Dairy-Free Oat Gurt. And here's a sampling of brave farmers who are making the switch and blazing a new path for other farmers. Some are doing it on their own, and others are working with the organizations listed on the previous slide. These farmers are shifting from producing chickens and cattle to growing hemp, mushrooms, and organic vegetables, from producing dairy to growing oats for oat milk, and from producing goat milk to making vegan cheese. These farmers are excited about the prospects of a new life that is not only more financially rewarding, but also better for their health and emotional well-being. So I've covered how plant-rich diets can powerfully address climate change and how they protect our terrestrial environment. There is an additional profound benefit. One of the greatest things about plant-rich diets as a solution to the climate and environmental emergencies is that they simultaneously are one of the most effective ways to improve human health and address the global chronic disease epidemic. Research in nutritional science has demonstrated that diets in whole plant foods reduce our risk for chronic diseases like heart disease, type 2 diabetes, obesity, and even cancer. Plant-rich diets can also improve our health by lowering blood sugar, cholesterol, blood pressure, and reducing inflammation. A recent study published in June of 2021 found that plant-rich diets can also help protect against COVID-19. The study found that people who ate a high-quality plant-rich diet were around 10% less likely to develop COVID-19 than those with a low-quality diet, and were 40% less likely to become severely ill if they developed COVID-19. A report published in 2020 by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, the World Health Organization, and other international non-governmental organizations analyzed the potential impact on health if the world were to adopt any of the 4 plant-rich dietary patterns, including flexitarian, pescatarian, vegetarian, or vegan. They concluded that compared to what would happen if global diets remained unchanged, a global shift to plant-rich diets would significantly reduce mortality, preventing 12.7 to 13.7 million premature adult deaths in the year 2030. They also projected that a shift to plant-rich diets would reduce diet-related health expenditures, meaning direct and indirect costs from coronary heart disease, stroke, cancer, and type 2 diabetes, by an average of 95% worldwide in the year 2030. The authors suggested that the savings in healthcare costs could be invested in lowering the cost of nutritious food. So I hope that I've conveyed just how powerful and transformational plant-rich diets can be for our climate, environment, and our health. And this was an advertisement for our 15-day global challenge. And we had speakers from all over the world. I've got this in the slides. I don't know if you're able to share those slides on the A2ZERO website, but these are the links to the starter kit, the daily emails, and the playlist. And the plantrichchallenge.org website there has you can actually sign up and you'll get an email back that gives you all these links. And then I just wanted to close with the idea of communities of practice. So I've been speaking from the Plant-Rich Diet Task Force from SRAG. We're seeking to make the world a community of practice. The Washtenaw Optimal Wellness that's promoting the Blue Zones live longer and better health countywide is written into the A2ZERO plan, is seeking to promote that countywide. And then my own Seventh-day Adventist Church, where I'm sitting here right now, we have been a community of practice in the area for 100 years. And we have weekly plant-rich potlucks at 1 p.m. on Saturday. So what about the city of Ann Arbor? The data suggests that if we don't go plant-rich, we may not really meet a net zero target. So thank you very much for your time, and I rest my case.
Great, thank you so much, Scott. Really appreciate that presentation, and I hope everyone is joining me in another virtual round of applause. With that, we will move on to our last speaker for the evening. That is Dr. Olivier Jolliet. So Dr. Jolliet is a full professor of environmental health sciences at the School of Public Health, University of Michigan. He has pioneered with colleagues the development of an LCA, or life cycle analysis, method for agriculture and food production since the early 1990s. He's compared the nutritional and environmental impacts of food systems, determining minutes of healthy life gained and lost for 5,800 individual foods. A high impact research study reported by more than 1,000 news outlets. He co-initiated the Life Cycle Initiative hosted at the United Nations Environment Program, presently coordinating the effort of more than 150 scientists worldwide towards development of impact assessment approaches. His work aims to compare the life cycle risks and benefits of foods, consumer products, and emerging technologies, and also to model and screen population exposure and effect on health. Dr. Jolliet has authored or co-authored more than 220 peer-reviewed publications or book chapters on these topics. So when you're ready, please take it away to talk about your research.
Thank you very much. So you will have to cope with my French accent. I'm from Switzerland, French-speaking part of Switzerland. In these 17 years I've been here in Ann Arbor, we've been developing research, and it was interesting because we started, in fact, on really sustainability. I worked for a long time on the impact of food and food system, and then realized that we were largely also, if like, it was separate community which were studying the question of nutrition, and we wanted to bridge the nutritional impact. And I worked with a colleague who is also in Michigan, a consultant, Victor Fulgoni, who is a nutritionist, and brought us, and together it was interesting. It was very stimulating to work together. So one goal of the research there was to bridge and have consistent evaluation of the environmental impact and the nutritional food. And we wanted also easy to understand indicators, because I mean, when you are in front and have so many different similar products, but not quite, it's relatively hard to make choices. And also to be health-based rather than when we look at the label, it's relatively complicated. You have the different dimension, and try to translate that on the health side. So we published last August this paper on small targeted dietary changes in nature food can yield substantial gain. And our idea was we took a study which is called the Global Burden of Disease, and is calculating years of life lost equivalent, DALYs, disability adjusted life years. But that doesn't speak too much. I mean, we had 10-6 DALY per case, and we translated in minutes of healthy life gain or lost. And then when we communicated on the hot dog, where one hot dog is 36 minutes of your life, that became viral. Like on CNN, that was 120 likes, and in fact, it went in a potential read, was communicated in news media to 1.3 billion people, which is good news, Scott, in the direction of what you presented, to convey the message of at least moving out of beef, which was one of the conclusion, in priority, I would say, before moving towards more plant-oriented diet. So we basically look at more than 5,000 food items, and how do we arrive to the 36 minutes? Okay, well, how do we look at that? We look at the components, and what we call risk component here or in fact 15 different positive or negative risks. So here in the case of a hot dog, you have processed meat, which is detrimental. You will have trans fat, TFA here, which is also detrimental, sodium, and then on the positive side, you have 1 gram of polyunsaturated fat, and you have a small amount of calcium, which is it. So this is the gram, and the global burden of disease, which is a very large worldwide study in every country in the world, has additional impact. On the positive side, you have vegetables, whole grain, fruits as a different dimension, and on detrimental you have like also red meat, which is not as detrimental as processed meat, but also important in that case. So a hot dog has 61, it's 140 gram hot dog on a bun. It has 61 gram processed meat, for example. And now the global burden of disease based on 50 different health outcomes, which include in our case diabetes, ischemic heart disease and cardiovascular disease, colorectal cancer and other disease, is able to quantify, in fact, the minute lost, or it's in microdali, 1 per million of a year, but we have 500,000 minutes in a year. So it's basically per gram of processed meat, we have nearly 0.5 minute lost. So now if we multiply my 61 gram by this 0.45 0.5 minute, we will get about 27 minute loss just with the red part here, which is my processed meat. I'm losing, because of the sodium, another 7 minutes, another 3 minutes for the trans fat. I'm gaining 1 minute with the calcium and the PUFA. And so we have 37 minus 1, so we have a loss of 36, which is the diamond, which is here. Okay, so and we can repeat that for all the food item of the US diet, and that's why we repeated that. So to give you an example, if you had our beef hot dog here, if you have chicken wings, the white meat is not detrimental in itself. You have still the sodium, which is about 5 minutes. If you have your veggie pizza, you are nearly neutral. In that case, what you lose with the sodium, you gain it with your vegetables. The apple pie would be also close to neutral. Then legumes would have, I mean, you can gain here 12 minutes. The salmon gain you also about here 15 minutes, and some nuts, even if they're salted, you lose a bit, but not so much, and you can gain here 25 minutes. This is per serving of each of these food. Okay, and so based on that, we can repeat that for all the food. And when we look, we have here 50 food groups, and we analyze, there was about 100 food in each of the food. And here you have the minutes, here it's gain up here and loss down here of these foods. And you have the range from among the 100 different food. This is a median of all food, 25th percentile and the 95th percentile, upper or lower level. So we see our hot dog here with our 36 minutes of life lost, around that. And this is really linked to the processed meat, as we mostly, and the sodium, as we saw a minute ago. And our nuts and seed here, which are at 25 minutes up here. Then we can see how the different parts. In the positive side, we have the fruit, the fudge starch, the vegetable, excluding potatoes, basically starchy vegetable or corn, in that case, which is not beneficial. Mixed vegetables, cereals. Here we have some of the snack, and it's interesting. The global burden of disease has, in terms of detrimental for sugar things, is here the sweetened beverages. Okay, that is demonstrated. The sugar itself doesn't show, at least at the same level, and could not be demonstrated, the effect of sugar on the detrimental impact of sugar could not be demonstrated. I think one reason is for other type of sugar. People eating more sugar will eat less of something. Whereas a Coke, you can take a Coke and take a second Coke in a row without having satiety feeling here. So we have the sweetened beverages. We see for the protein food, we see the positive here from nuts and seeds, the legumes that we can have, and then the poultry and eggs are detrimental, but not too much compared to the cured meats that we can have here. Dairy product, it's interesting, this study was in fact financed originally by the dairy industry. They wanted to know where they stand. It's interesting to see. So they're not great, but they are close to neutral, and that's because basically what the calcium is positive in dairy product, but you have, especially for cheese, you have too much salt. I'm original from the Gruyere region, which is and rather salty, and that's, but we are in the range of few minutes lost close to neutral, depending also which type of milk you are taking. So in fact, relatively, I would say, within the animal or within the plant production, you have large differences, and also on the environmental impact, where we will see in a minute. So if now we look, just to take an example, within this is here, I can take one group, which are the pizza here, and they go from minus 15 minutes to being even slightly positive in certain pizza. And here we can look also, in addition of course to the nutrition, we looked at 18 different type of environmental impacts, including climate change and air pollution. And I show here the results for the pizza. So here you have the minutes. I've put the minutes lost up this time. Okay, that's an extra meat pizza. So you lose close to 14 minutes of life. You still have some beneficial, you have some tomatoes, so that's beneficial, but it doesn't compensate for what we have. And here we'll have the extra veggie pizza or bean and veggie, which is close to neutral. No cheese pizza. I don't know if it's a pizza. That's a debatable in that case. And the Hawaii pizza, which are fruit, is really neutral in that. So within a group, we could have large range. Well, really, we should think when we do party and invite people at work. I mean, why not have either all veggie pizza or perhaps one meat pizza and 6 veggie, whereas presently we have the contrary usually very often in many cases. Now we see that what is reflected here in nutrition with pizza in terms of impact, if we looked at the kilo CO2 per serving that we have, we see a very similar pattern where the extra meat is substantially higher than the cheddar with bean and veggie. In that case, relatively little difference with no cheese or bean and veggie, depending what you have here. For the impact on human health, they are associated with fine particulates here, which are formed mostly for ammonia emission. And here we see the similar pattern. So what we gain, we have win-win when we switch here from a meat pizza to a veggie pizza on all impact in that case. And we had taken here 100 in the paper. If you take it, and in my slide, there is possibility to get the paper free if I go to the first slide here with this address. I don't know, the slide will be distributed, Chan?
Yes, we'll send out these slides to
okay.
everyone.
So you can reach the full item, and in fact in the supporting info you have 160 food that you can look. But now I've put here, I like this representation where I've put the nutrition impact. So this is gain, so it's positive here, the nutrition, minutes of life gain, and here it's minute of life loss. This is all per serving, and here you have the carbon footprint. And first things we can see here is not all animal food are equal. So the beef is really the big contributor here. Why? It has the methane, and in addition you make 2 years to grow an animal that you kill on the spot and you only get the meat. If you look, it's twice higher than pork and lamb, which is here, and about 4 times higher than either chicken or dairy products. And that was reflected in Scott's slide that we saw here. And I mean, if we take salmon, for example.
He agrees with me.
I know.
So salmon, which is here, we still have non-negligible carbon footprint, but much less than when we are here. On the nutrition side, we have, in fact, the processed meat, which is really high. The latest version of this was done based on the 2016 burden of disease. The latest version, in fact, is bringing the red meat more detrimental in the latest results obtained. So that would bring them also really in the dark red for all this. So the question is now, if we would target some changes, let's say in the first step, on the long term, we might want to become all vegetarian or vegan, but short term, could we make an important difference with targeted changes? So the idea was, let's reduce what we have here in the dark red. Okay, let's substitute what we have in the dark red by a mix of nuts, even peanut butter could be okay. Or fruits or vegetables, beans or whole grain that we can have, and we take a mix of these different items. And when we do that, this is on the nutrition side, we see that by changing 10% of the diet, this is basically the processed meat and the beef, okay, that represent 10% of the calorie of the diet. We replace it by this mix of healthy food, we can gain about 48 minutes or 46 minutes gain per day per person, okay, for changing that. And in parallel, we see that we can reduce our food footprint. So this is the carbon footprint of our food consumption up by about 36% in that case. So 10% of the diet, we can make a huge difference if we choose what we target. And that's good news, because we cannot expect perhaps that everybody is changing from one day to the other the entire diet, but changing 10%, that seems realistic to ask in that case. We can see what is the potential, and this is the ideal diet of the global burden of disease, and we see the potential for improvement. Total, these are the different beneficial food items like whole grain and nuts and seed that we can have here, or the fruit, and we don't consume any of the detrimental. So where do we stand compared to that in the US? Okay, so this is male, female here. Bad news for the male, that on average are losing close to 20 minutes or 15 minutes. So female are on average eating healthier by about 15 minutes. This is mostly due to the processed meat, the sodium, and the red, and a bit to the sugar sweetened beverage, which are higher in male than in female. Okay. if we look between the different ethnicity, the ethnicity which is eating the healthier is the Asian, very clearly, with about 24 minutes improvement compared to the white average consumption. And what was interesting, in fact, the Asian, they are eating relatively salty. So if they would reduce a bit the sodium, they could do even better in that case. Now, if we look at the US healthy diet or Mediterranean diet, we could compare to the present level gain these like these 50 minutes per day, but the potential is even higher to go up here to nearly 100 minutes per day, which are safe. Now, what are these minutes of healthy life? Of course, they are averages over a large population. So I cannot guarantee that if I don't eat my hot dog, my life will certainly be enhanced or prolonged by 36 minutes. But on average, this is relatively representative of what we have. The second thing is, it's not only about living longer. This is living healthier. I mean, having a healthy life during a longer time, which is probably, in fact, the most interesting in that case. If we look on this diet, the carbon footprint that we have, male are eating more calorie, and that translates in a higher diet, and also more beef, which is really substantial for the carbon footprint. We've seen that, so that's really important. So that's one of the big difference in that case. And white Asian, again, the beef and here the dairy product are higher in that case, which make it a higher impact here. Now, one comment is also on price. I mean, vegetables, if we look and go to the market, you find chicken cheaper than vegetables in many cases, even per weight unit. And this is really a problem also where the subsidies, the incentive and subsidy in the US are going in the agriculture. And a very large part goes to corn, and that's mostly for feedstock. Soybean, we see here, a lot is on cotton, rice, and here wheat. Now, if we look, only 2% of subsidy are really for what is healthy and sustainable. So I'm not asking here to cut the subsidy to agriculture, but to reorient them to what really would be positive and provide basically affordable diet. I think already now we can have affordable solution where, like for nuts, we can choose peanuts, which are relatively cheap. If you have more money, you could go to almond. But then when we were studying the water footprint, almond might be also problematic unless you would cultivate in different way. Like in Israel, in fact we have almond production with very little water compared to what we have in California in that case. So we need to recalibrate incentive and subsidies in that case. What is also cool is this 25 minutes gain and 40 minutes loss. We can now start comparing to impact of pollution. I mean, a day living in Beijing is about 35 minutes lost per day, okay, in that case. But we can start also consuming to some, if you have a body lotion where you have hydroquinone in it, you can go to like 50 or 80 minute loss per day. And we start having the knowledge, and I couldn't dream that when I came in 2005 in Michigan that we would have this sort of data, but we can start comparing the burden on health of chemical in products, for example, with exercise. When I gained, I mean, if I commute, I'm the east side of Ann Arbor, I'm commuting to the School of Public Health, that's about a 20 minutes gain per day on the bike in that case. And some worker exposure, I'm afraid, can be also very detrimental. So we are in an exciting area of big data, but we need to act on that and really move in also the line of what Scott was indicating here. So should we all become vegan to be seen on the long term? But for now, small targeted realistic changes can make a big difference, one food at a time, in that case here. Okay. And if you want to study that further, come at the School of Public Health. In environmental health science, we are studying and bringing that together between health and environment. This is our DNA in that case. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you so much. That's a really interesting research, and I think it's a really great way of illustrating some of these benefits and everything. And I don't know if anybody else noticed, yes, another round of applause. I don't know if anyone else noticed, but I did see that a peanut butter and jelly sandwich was pretty high up there in the minutes gained, which makes me feel a lot better about my decision to eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for lunch yesterday. So
I was surprised by that, but it's basically nuts. That's what is included there, which is interesting.
Great. All right, well, I'll invite all of our speakers to join me back on camera here. I know Jay was traveling, so not sure if she'll be able to or not, but there she is, lovely. All right, and we'll go into our Q&A section. So we do have some questions here in the Q&A already. If you have any questions, please feel free to add more to that Q&A tool. Or you can also raise your hand and we should be able to call on you and allow you to speak and ask your question directly. But we'll go ahead and get started with some of the questions that we have here in the Q&A function. So Jay, I see a question here asking about a citation on your 1.5 gigaton figure. Do you have a citation for that? Or we might be able to provide it in a follow-up email.
1.85, yeah. I can find it and send it to you in an email.
Awesome, great, thank you. All right, we have a question here also about why is beef so cheap? If anyone wants to talk about that.
I think Professor Olivier, am I saying that right? Touched on it, which is that we subsidize that type of agriculture to a really, really high extent. So we're all paying for it right now.
It's good
with our taxes.
Great, and kind of a additional question to that is, what agricultural policies encourage meat production?
Yeah, so something I didn't touch on with policy that I feel like maybe I should have is the Farm Bill. So the Farm Bill is the federal piece of legislation that kind of dictates how the US does agriculture as well as food assistance. It is revised every 4 years, and there's provisions in it about those subsidies, about insurance. Those are the policies that are influencing the type of agriculture that we do. In 2018, the last time that the Farm Bill was revised, the Democrats were writing it, and they put a lot of progressive stuff in there. It is up for it's up for its revision in 2023. Everyone I know in Washington is saying that the House is going to flip red, and so not a lot of people are putting a lot of their eggs in that basket as far as it becoming another progressive farm bill and like moving these objectives forward even more. I think we're hoping that it just stays the same, to be honest. I think that's like the best case scenario at this point.
Great, thank you for those insights. I saw we do also have a comment here, more of a comment than a question, in regards to Jay's presentation, just saying that native grasses do have the deepest roots. So, which is definitely true. Gotta maintain those native plant populations where we can. I did also see, Keesa, there was a question that you answered in the chat, but I do want to bring that up out loud also, just in case there are folks watching this recording after the fact. So if you don't mind, so that question was, what are some specific programs for underrepresented farmers to achieve land ownership?
Yep. And I just share like, because we're learning, because this is our first year within the coalition. So we're learning a lot about land access and unequal issues within that space. But we're putting together some resources. There's like, what I like about Washtenaw County is that it's so many people that like to help one another. And we really, really do believe in this local food production and what makes a good community. And so right now we're working with a lot of different people to kind of figure that out of like how land access is reached. Currently, just for the Washtenaw Black Farmers Fund, we only offer down payments because it's so expensive. I mean, extremely expensive within our county, but there's a list of national resources that are helping underrepresented farmers. And I let the gentleman know that he can reach out and I can get him a list. That would probably be a good one to add to our presentation. So thank you for that question.
Yeah, and thank you for the answer. All right, we have a question here for Professor Jolliet. What do you view as the purpose or the target audience of your research? Assuming that you're using the average American lifespan as a baseline according to your model, if one were to eat exclusively apples, one would live longer than average, but in reality, they'd probably starve to death. How do you square such edge cases in the utility of your research?
So let me start with the second question or second comment. The global, what we had calculated here was for small changes. I mean, that's why we limited to 10%. The global burden of disease gives you maximum value above which you don't have benefit. So you cannot live forever eating only nuts, because above 30-gram nuts, you don't have additional benefit. You got what you need. So that's why when I was taking the substitution, you want a mix. You want a mix of fruit, vegetables, legumes, whole grain, get your fibers. And that's, so we cannot just live on one food. And that's reflected in the epidemiological study in that sense. Okay, so we can do much better than what we are doing, but we need to keep the diversity. That's not only one type of food that we have here. The target audience, as we say, we reach 1.3 billion people from the paper and directly. I mean, that was the hot dog, which really make it viral and very well diffused. But I think it's interesting. I got colleagues who told me, my kids have looked at your, I don't know how they get the study. It was not from them. It was a previous PhD student and my head of department. Their kids, 8 years old, came to them and say, "Ma'am, give me 10 minutes of life instead of asking for a fruit." And what is very interesting is the kids even are picking that up. And I had nutritionists to say, for years I've tried to, and when I communicate good nutrition, it's really hard with the kid. This one, they pick it up like that. And so I think this metric is interesting and easy to implement, if you like, and accounts for the trade-off. I mean, in any food, or you have some positive, some negative, and try that. Is it perfect? No, because I don't know if an apple and a banana is gram fruit. And we don't have the resolution yet to know what is really good or not in that case. Okay. And also on the environmental side, I mean, here the food preparation was not really well, I mean, covered. So that's one domain. Very important. We have not mentioned so much, but the food loss is really important. And here we have a 30% improvement potential by avoiding food loss. I mean, be it in restaurants and our table, let's serve small portion and we ask it as many times as we need. But that's the first departure, that we don't leave anything. I saw an advertisement the other day, which was a person that was on obesity, and they were saying, "Oh, I've learned from that I need to finish my plate." The problem is not to finish the plate. The problem is to have a too big plate. And I was furious to see this advertisement, to say that's completely wrong. We don't need more on leave anything on our plate. We need to put less. That's interesting. And on organic, that's interesting with organic food, because I would say from our research here, also look at the impact of chemical. Once we have got rid of the chemical, and I would say in Western country, we did a relatively good job for many chemicals to ban them. The problem is they are still used in developing countries. That's a real problem. But once we've done that, really the priority is enough food and vegetable which are affordable. If we can pay bioproduction, organic production, okay. I mean, it could be good, but that's not, I think, the priority, because with organic production, you need more land use. If you like, the production gets down, and it's not obvious that for the environment, for the carbon, that it's always better. If you like, we are very close to each other. If you can store more in the soil, more carbon in the soil, that becomes interesting. But that's really a condition to do. So for me, priority is that let's get affordable vegetables and plant products which are healthy at low prices.
Great, thank you. We have one more question here. When people complain about high costs of local or organic foods, there's a desire to explain that these are reducing the ultimate healthcare costs. Are there any life cycle analysis being done to explain that costs paid now for such foods ultimately reduce costs later?
Not that easy on my end to do. I mean, we're working, in fact, on the cost side also to bring it together and in the, if you like, these targeted changes to bring the cost. There are two things, if I'm very cynical. We say, for example, that cigarette is costing a lot on health. On the other hand, people who smoke are paying the pension of the one who are not smoking, if we are realistic. So, I mean, you have trade-off like that it depends a bit which boundary you are considering, but that's true. If you like, what is sure is you have on average the healthy food are also the one which have low environmental impact, and we have co-benefits really with it in that case. But still big difference. I mean, greenhouse crop, eating local but from a greenhouse, it's not smart. It's better to transport it from Mexico in that case. So we don't want eating seasonal is really important, I would say, in addition to eating local things.
Great, thank you. I have a couple of questions. So the first one I think is more towards Keesa and Jay, but you know, as I've gotten more involved in the food sustainability sector, I've learned more about these things. But one term that we hear a lot is food deserts. So I was wondering if you two could talk a little bit more about what those are, what it means for the community, and how we can try to address food deserts.
Oh, I'll take that one. Food deserts is a term that was created by the USDA, but when you come into Black and Brown communities, what we call is a food apartheid, because it's really apartheid. It's very, it's not a natural ecological thing that happens. It's a very systematic way of when it comes to like digital redlining, where when you look at these deserts, they look at Black and Brown communities, what they tend to call underserved communities, in their location to like grocery stores, and so that's a made up term. It's based off USDA, and so like I typically don't use that word. I use the word food apartheid, because it's more than the lack of like grocery stores and other healthy options. It's it really gets at the discriminatory practices that are constantly being put upon us through policy to keep people oppressed.
Great.
There's actually a really good documentary that's just come out called "They're Trying to Kill Us," and it's really well done, and it gets into what Keesa just said about the food apartheid systems that causes certain neighborhoods to be devoid of the kinds of food accessibility that really could be there. It's a directed public policy, really.
Thank you.
And Malik Yakini, who's one of the leaders in Detroit around all things food, he made, I was listening to him talk, I think it was at a U of M symposium, and he was reminding us that like this food desert term, or what we think of as these areas where there's lack of access to healthy food, don't just happen in our Black and brown communities, but they're also happening in our rural communities. And so, like, we just have to remember that like there are many of them, and just to keep that in mind as we think about policies, and even to not like group them all together, because what's happening in Black and brown communities is similar but different than what's happening in rural communities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Definitely. Thank you. I appreciate that. And then I think we'll just close it out with a question for all of you. Every single one of you touched on the issue of food waste in one way or another. But I don't think we had like a presentation on that. So I just got to open it up to have anyone who feels like they have something to add to that conversation on food waste, how we can help to reduce food waste, why it's such an issue. And that also ties in a little bit to next month's topic on composting. So if any of you have anything to add on that front. Yeah, Scott.
I would just comment that in SRAG, there's a food waste task force. And so I've been listening into that conversation, and it's really opened up my ears over the last year to that whole issue. There's a subgroup called Lunch Out of Landfills. And what they do is they go into public schools and they educate the kids in the school systems about the amount of food that's wasted just, in the school lunch program. And so there's a tremendous amount of food that's wasted in that particular venue in public schools. And so there's some really cool ways that you can go in and work with like an elementary school or a middle school or whatever. And the program's called Lunch Out of Landfills. But yeah, it's a really big issue globally. And it relates to food insecurity. If we simply had an equitable food distribution and got food into people's mouths that needed it, then we would just simply waste a lot less food, So anyway, that's just one small little item along the way there.
Yeah, my comment would be about, I really feel like we have a very unhealthy view of consumption and what that means within our society across the board, across all systems, and specifically within the food systems, and the lack of reverence. It's more transactional, extractive practices that are happening, and then it's not really led by the local community. It's really led by corporate thinking. When it comes to the circle of human concern, we allow the corporations to tell us what we should consume, how we should consume, instead of looking at our communities in a very holistic way and setting the pace for ourselves of like, this is how we want to build our communities. So when it comes to consumption, when it comes to food waste, I really think it's a very bad understanding of consumption.
Thank you. And I think that gets to what Dr. Jolliet was saying about, instead of saying, make sure you eat everything that's on your plate, why don't we say, make sure that the plates that we're serving in our restaurants are the appropriate serving size for what
it's
we
interesting
need.
Because I was heading the waste task force a few years ago at U of M, and the canteen had reduced the food waste tremendously by serving small portion, and people can come as many times as they want to get reserved. Also, the way the food was prepared, they were teaching or instructing the cook to the people preparing the food to how to use most of the food without throwing it away, and could really make a huge difference. That's very interesting.
And part of the solution in the schools is to have composting situations right there at the schools. So if you combine a plant-rich diet with composting, then you can keep food out of landfills. And that's where, you know, you take a bunch of food and dump it into a landfill, and all of a sudden you're going to create a microbial system situation that's going to generate methane and, you know, all kinds of unwanted waste products. So, you know, in my household, all my food scraps go out into a compost pile. And of course, I'm a vegan. I totally agree with Dr. Jolliet of taking small steps in that direction, because even small steps can have a huge impact on your carbon footprint. I mean, I made that in my presentation, just one less quarter pounder a week or something, you know, can make a big difference. So just keep making those small steps. But once you eat those plant products and then take the banana peels and whatever and just put them in a compost pile, the food waste problem is solved. And of course, let's eat all the food that we produce.
Great. All right. Well, I think that is a good note to end it on, especially because you can learn more about composting if you join us next month. We are at time. So I just want to thank all 4 of our speakers for joining us today. And I also want to thank all of you for attending the event today. Just as a reminder, we will be sending out the slides to everyone who registered for the event tonight. And we will also be posting a recording of it on our YouTube page. So if you missed part of it, then please check that out. So thank you all again, and I hope everyone has a great night and has a really healthy and delicious dinner.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for organizing. Great. Thank you.